250,000 dropouts before COVID, 750,000 dropouts during and post-COVID. Needless to say that the pandemic has dealt a major blow to South African schools. Now, we've had the first, second, and third wave so far, and we've seen just how huge a toll that has had on public schooling in our country. And the question we're asking here today, are South African schools struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic? And to add your thoughts and your suggestions to the topic that we're having, please feel free to follow Mountaintop Productions on all social media platforms. But in particular, be sure to head over to YouTube to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts on our YouTube channel. Now, to make us understand more about what we're going to be discussing here today, let's take a look at the following insert.
Every year, South Africans wait with bated breath for the announcement of the matric pass rate. The highest performing students are paraded across newspapers, news channels, and at special gala events. These pass rates are used as a benchmark to measure the success of the basic education system. In 2009, the matric pass rate sat at 60.6% and gradually increased to 78.2% in 2018. These are great numbers, right? But do these numbers truly reflect the state of basic education in South Africa? Considering that of the roughly 1,02,500 students who registered for grade 1 in 2017, only about half of them wrote matric in 2018. Many feel that the pass rate is actually around 40%, with only 17% obtaining bachelor passes. Now, these stats speak to a normal day in South Africa. What happens when the world is struck by a global pandemic that brings everything to a halt? In a country where 60% of the population is said to have access to the internet, online learning becomes the order of the day. The already overpopulated classrooms had to be drastically cut down. With an already high dropout rate, some students were only expected to come to school 2 to 3 times a week. With this in mind, we ask ourselves, is enough being done to safeguard South Africa's basic education system, or are we simply falling behind?
Now, today we're joined by an amazing group of panelists from different walks of life to help us unpack the day's discussion. We're joined by Mrs. Amanda Blankfield-Kosov. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, and you?
I'm good, thanks. Amanda is the CEO of Empowervate. We're also joined by Mr. Vela Mdlele, an educator, unionist, as well as an activist. How are you feeling today, Mama?
I'm feeling great, sir. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thank you so much. We're also joined by Ms. Siyanda Sokela, a mentor and outreach to schools coordinator, working closely with schools to supplement their curriculum. How are you doing, Siyanda?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here today. And last but not least, a special addition to today's episode, grade 11 learner from the Piritona Secondary School all the way in Heilbron, Mone Mutsamai. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling well, thank you.
Are you intimidated by anyone today?
No, I'm not intimidated.
Awesome stuff. Now, getting straight into it, we're asking the question, are South African schools struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, or could it be business as usual? Baba Mdlele, now you were an educator, started practicing as an educator before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you just give us sort of like an overview of what it was like then and what it is like now? Are you coping as educators?
Thank you, Sydney. I think the question should be directed to, is the Department of Education coping with the pandemic currently? Not the entire schools, because some other schools is life as normal, and other schools, they are really suffering. It's tough out there, it's tough, Mr. Sydney. Because before COVID, you're going to have around maximum 200 days of schooling.
Yeah.
So currently, the days have been reduced. We have lost 3 to 5 years of schooling. So we are having a backlog. It's really tough. Then if you can check, let's say term 1, we have 10 weeks of attendance. If we have a grade 8 that is going to come once a week, literally that learner is attending 10 days of schooling in term 1.
Yeah.
So what do you expect from that learner? So
do you find
really
that the treatment of COVID-19 is different when you look at public schools in the townships and maybe ex-Model C schools?
The treatment is not necessarily different, but it goes with the number of learners that you have in the private sector and in the public schools. So once you have more learners, that means you are going to get the hardest bit of the COVID-19, because if you're going to have in a school where you have 37 classes and you have a roll of 2,400 learners, then you are going to suffer a lot from there.
We'll unpack more on that discussion. Moni, you were a learner obviously before the pandemic, and now you find yourself having to go to school wearing a mask, being sanitized, and all of these different changes in the classroom. How are you finding that whole experience?
Thank you for the question. I'm finding all of these experiences as a very difficult situation to be under. I mean, as the world becomes increasingly interconnected, so are the risks we face in life. The COVID-19 has not stopped at international borders, but it has also affected us without being maybe putting us aside, because we are students, that we are going under pressure. And sometimes we feel that the education system is failing us, that we should just give up because the pressure is just so much. And sometimes we feel like we as students are going to school, but only to find out that we are going to be returned because of the COVID-19 cases that keep on shooting on top of the roof of our school. It's totally a lot.
Do you find it difficult to study with the pandemic? Do you find the workload to be a bit too much sometimes?
I find it very difficult. In some cases, I feel like I'm having stress. All the work is just too much for me to handle at a single time. It's just a lot.
We'll find out more about that stress in a little while. Now, Amanda, I know that you work very closely with schools, with some of the programs that you have. Have you found that, for example, when we look at things such as extramural activities, where learners before used to be able to go out and debate and play soccer and do all of these other different things, do you find that that has declined, or are you still able to function normally as someone who used to work very closely with schools and with the Department of Education?
Yes, it's been a big challenge. I mean, last year all the extracurricular programs in the Department of Education were actually put on hold. There weren't allowed to be any programs, except we managed to do an online version of our program, a very small version. Just the first time we're doing it online, so we had to pivot our whole program from events to online. And then also, obviously, the attendance is much lower than it used to be. This year we did have more schools entering, but now because of the system of, you know, one day at school, then another day not at school, that whole system is really causing challenges because the contact time is lower. So to have time to do the programs is less, because curriculum obviously is number one priority. So we are finding it very challenging.
So it becomes a bit daunting sometimes to continue with the work that you've been doing, and also just access to online material.
Yes.
You're dealing with some poor schools that don't have access to internet and all of those. Could be quite challenging. Now, Siyanda, I know that you work very closely with supplementing the curriculum in schools and, you know, providing support where schools might not necessarily be able to provide fully the curriculum they're providing to learners. Are you finding that the work that you do is adding any form of significant change? Are the differences that you're seeing? Are you able to work normally in light of the pandemic?
Okay, so on the program that I'm working on, so basically it's just to support schools and try to improve learners' marks and also to try and fill in the gaps with regards to the curriculum. So with the pandemic happening, so it's given us challenges because sometimes you cannot go to a school because there are cases, so they've had to close down. And sometimes you go to a school and the number of learners that are in that school that you're supposed to support, you cannot support everyone. So you end up having to pick, and then there's learners that are going to be left out. So it has been a challenge. And sometimes when you have to do teacher workshops, you can't do the teacher workshops, and you have to do them to be virtual. And when they are virtual, you actually have issues with teachers with they don't have data, or the devices are not connecting properly, and then you end up not having those meetings entirely. So it has been a challenge.
Amanda, would you say that there's enough awareness when it comes to COVID-19, especially when it comes to schools? And I think those are questions I'm going to throw to everyone in the panel, especially when you look at precautions being followed, when you look at whether or not there's sanitizing taking place, the wearing of masks. From your observation, if there has been, do you see that happening? And are we perhaps pointing all the fingers at the wrong place and saying, but department, you're not doing enough, whereas we might just be sitting back and not taking care of ourselves as people?
Well, I know from an experience, we went to schools in Soweto a few weeks ago. We had a donation of sanitizers, big drums of sanitizers. So we went there, and the one school, they didn't check us when we walked in. They didn't do a temperature check. They didn't do sanitizing, nothing. We just walked in. Yeah. So that was the first school. And then that school also, the principal said to us, how are we supposed to manage all of these learners? They had over 1,000 learners and they only had one thermometer. So they're like, how are we going to manage this when kids come in the morning?
Sure.
And how are you going to stand there and do the temperature of each child? It's going to take forever. They're going to start late. So the principal was very upset about that. And then we said, well, we're donating stuff. Like we're not the department. We can't provide everything you need. We're just trying to supplement. So that shows that there's like a big challenge out there. Like the sanitizer, obviously they need it. They need thermometers. They need, controls in place. And then the second school we went to, they did, as we walked in, they were like, okay, come, we need to do your temperature. We need you to sign in. They were very organized, sanitizer. So within the same community, you have different ways of dealing with the same problem.
Different practices.
So I don't think there's a blanket answer for that.
And all it takes is just one. I mean, if you're walking to that other school without being tested and without having your temperature checked, all it takes is one infection to just close out the entire school.
Exactly.
Fox, Vela, I'm gonna bring it to you. I almost called you by your nickname way back in the day. Do you find that the quality of results and the quality of learners that we're producing? I mean, last year, when we came to a standstill and the pandemic was starting out, at the end of the year or at the beginning of 2021, we saw the department coming onto the news and talking about how the pass percentage has increased, how a lot more learners have passed. Do you find that on one end, fine, we can say that learners are passing, but as an educator and from your experience, is the quality of the pass convincing, especially looking at all the points that you raised about losing out on contact time with learners, having to trim out the curriculum and all those other examples?
Yeah, Mr. Sydney. I cannot say the quality of pass rate yesterday is just a fallacy or something that is stamped from the air. That is true reflection of what is happening on the ground. Remember, grade 12, the curriculum was not trimmed. Even the setting of the exam paper was quality assured by Umalusi and everything. So there are external and internal moderators to ensure that the final examination that is written by grade 12 learners is of the good standard. If we can check, mathematical paper was leaked. Then the physical paper also leaked. They had to write another paper to ensure that the quality of examination was not compromised. So in a sense that our results are a true reflection of what is happening, regardless of what is happening. Remember this, as Amanda said, it's not a blanket approach, but when it comes to grade 12 results, that was the true reflection of what has happened. Because if we say that is not true, that means we are undermining Umalusi, the internal moderators and the external moderators. So yeah.
Very interesting that you speak about the quality of results produced in grade 12, how there's Umalusi, how papers that were leaked had to be rewritten. And I'm going to throw this to you, Sianda and Moni. Do you find that in light of the pandemic, in terms of the schools that you're visiting and the intervention that you're doing and your experience as a learner, do you find that all these other grades are receiving the same amount of attention, or are we only focusing on the big boys and the big girls in school?
I think in most schools, they're actually focusing on the big girls and the big boys. So it's mostly metric. So, because if you notice, most schools, they actually have programs and they've are scheduled their timetable that metrics, they come to school almost every day. They come to school every day, and then you have your grade 8, grade 9, 10, and 11 alternating. So now what becomes a problem is, what's going to be happening with those grade 11s once they're in grade 12? There's going to be a huge gap, and the teachers have a lot of work that they need to do because there were not enough attention was paid to them when they were still in grade 11. So it is creating a gap, but right now most schools are actually prioritizing on grade 12s.
And what is your personal experience, Moni? Do you find that you are given the same amount of attention, care, assurance that you'll make it through the year as your bigger sisters and bigger brothers in your school?
I don't think we are given the same reassurance, the same support they are given the big girls and big boys at the school. Because in some cases we find that we are expected to come to school maybe 4 times a week, and worse, they are always at school. The teachers are always attending their periods, and they are always given that kind of treatment that is more of the quality that is not the same as we get here at school. So it's quite different.
Now, I'm going to ask you another question. I'm so sorry about that, Vela. In terms of you as learners, are you playing your role in terms of coming to school when you have to come to school, completing your work when you have to complete your work, wearing your masks when you have to wear your masks? Or are we just looking at, those guys are not doing A, B, C, and D, and they are wrong, but you don't see anything wrong with some of the conduct that learners might be having?
I don't think we are not following the protocols, the rules that are provided by our president. Because he had stated that we should always wear our masks in order to prevent the causes, the consequences of the COVID-19 cases. But we are not doing it. That's why in most cases we find that at our school we are experiencing different cases of COVID-19. And more especially the learners that are not mostly at school, we are not doing our work. For example, we are expected that we should use online studies for in case we are not always at school again. So we should use online learnings, but we are not attending them. Maybe we would complain that the cost of data, a national crisis, or that our families are so privileged to a point that we cannot not even a person in the household owns a smartphone. So I don't think we are playing our part.
Interesting input. Vela, you wanted to say something before Umoni Akulu.
Thanks. I wanted to add on the issue attendance from grade 11 going down. Remember, when this thing called COVID came, it caught us by surprise, all of us. The unionists, the education, the bureaucrats, everyone. So the number of learners at schools were supposed to be reduced. So where is the priority? Let us check the barometer of the education system. Where do we measure that the education system is doing well in a country? We measure it by grade 12. So the priority was supposed to be directed to grade 12s. Then as we learn to live with this new normal, then we can adjust it to other lower grades. That's what I wanted to add.
To other lower grades. Hey, but my concern is just one, right? Understanding that that's where we check the quality that we're producing in a country. But aren't you concerned about these lower ones at the current moment, that what type of grade 12 they are going to be when they get to their matric?
It goes without saying that we are all concerned. We are all concerned because the workload now has become tripled, doubled, or it's multiplied now. The lost time of teaching it's just a situation that we must learn to live with it in a moment. Then as it unfolds, we learn to find the strategies, a way, a method on how to ensure we are catching up.
Well, I know the other panelists are itching to ask questions and provide their own inputs. We'll have more for you after the break. Should we move towards a borderless Africa?
I would say open up the borders. To open our borders, it will be committing suicide. That argument or that idea comes from South African exceptionalism.
You look into our country, we've got Cyprus mafia, Israeli mafia, Nigerian mafia. What nonsense is that?
Well, these are issues that have long existed. Putting South Africa first is not mutually exclusive to looking towards a borderless Africa.
I don't think now is the right time to do this.
Welcome back. Now, while we were on ad break, Sianda had a very interesting question for Uvela that we didn't want to spoil. You wanted to ask Vela something about his statements on grade 12s and the amount of attention that's been put there.
Okay, so while visiting schools, most of the time I actually deal with matrics anyway. So that's also one of the privileges they have. They have mentors, different subjects who are actually supporting them with the curriculum, supporting the teachers. Now, in his statement, he's saying, obviously, our measure for education in South Africa is matric. Okay, that's the quality. Now, let's say I'm a funder coming from the USA, and then I'm wanting to check the quality of your learners for grade 9. What kind of grade 9s are you making? If you guys are seeing them only twice. And then now, in the interim, yes, learners can rotate, but it shouldn't be a permanent solution. What is the Department of Education doing about this? Because obviously, this, we can see, already we're looking at the 4th wave coming.
Yeah.
We've already hit the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd wave. What are they doing? Because obviously this is not going anywhere anytime soon. What are they doing about it? Because obviously we know there's many learners in class, that's why they're rotating. What are they doing about it? Why are they not building up schools?
Now, we do need to mention that we did invite the Department of Education to this particular episode, and unfortunately we could not reach them. I'm not expecting for Uvela to answer questions on behalf of the department. But another major concern that I have, Amanda, is that these challenges that we have in the education sector, I mean, you've been working with schools for quite some time, and you might have picked up not even similarities, that now we're just masking some of these challenges with COVID-19. Oh, we can't do this because there's COVID-19. Do you find that that is unfair, or is it correct to look at all of these challenges that we're speaking about and just point to the pandemic?
I think that the problems were there, and COVID-19 is just a magnifying glass, and it made them pop up and made them worse. I don't think that we had everything perfect before.
Yeah.
Obviously not. So, the problems were there. We're just finding them more, and now we have to deal with them in a quicker way. Like everything's being fast-tracked. Like the online, a lot of the times people weren't using online at all, and then suddenly they had to use online.
Yeah.
It was like there was no choice anymore. It was, you're born before technology. It didn't matter anymore. Now you had to use it. You had to learn it like overnight. So it's made things fast track. It's made things go in a different speed. But it definitely hasn't. It hasn't made things worse in a way that they weren't worse before. It's just highlighted problems. But now with how we're dealing with it, that's making things worse. Like having learners only coming once or twice a week, that's going to make the curriculum fall behind, and then that's going to cause another ripple effect. So how we're dealing with the COVID is causing more problems, but it's because we didn't know what else to do. So I don't think anyone has a perfect answer. Whether you're in South Africa or you're overseas, there's no perfect solution here. We're all learning as we go.
I mean, Sianda just mentioned something interesting, making an example of a possible funder that could come from another country to look at the quality of learners that we're producing in schools and so on and so forth. Do you find that in light of the pandemic that there's been a lot of withdrawal from NPOs, NGOs, and other supporting structures to schools and the department itself, because maybe they might feel they don't have access to learners anymore, they can't take photos of the learners anymore? How are you finding that? Do you have an idea of how that is going out?
I know that because of COVID rules, the numbers have been decreased in programs. Like some programs used to have, like, let's say 200 learners going to an event, but now because of COVID rules of social distancing, and now they have to get a venue to double the size, things like that, they've cut the numbers down to like 100.
Yeah.
So I'd say that the numbers have been cut down, but people still do want to do programs in schools. They see there's a need, they want to give them the opportunity to be empowered. So definitely they're going to continue programs, but just at a smaller scale, which is sad because then fewer learners get the benefit.
I'm bringing to you, Vela. I mean, earlier on I tried to ask Moni a question around these precautionary measures being followed up in schools, and you don't have to mention your school in particular. Maybe this could be an observation that you've seen in other schools. Are you finding, apart from the teachers, apart from the learners, the schooling community, your structures such as your school governing bodies, parents, different stakeholders, do you find that enough is being done to encourage learners themselves to follow precautions in schools, or are learners themselves just sort of like taking a step back and saying, we're not going to wear those masks, we're going to drink those sanitizers, it's whatever?
Yeah, if we can check education, there are three components. It's a learner, it's a teacher, it's a parent. It's a school, there are teachers, it's a community. So it is not entirely the role of a school to ensure that these learners, they adhere to the procedures that should prevent the spreading of COVID-19. It is the community, it starts with the community. So if they are not wearing masks in the community, then when they come to school, they have to wear a mask when they enter the premises. Then after school, they put down their mask, life is back to normal. So it's a futile exercise for the school to encourage learners to wear masks, where in the community, the parents themselves, they are not encouraging the learners to wear a mask. So it's a situation whereby we can say at school they wear masks, in some schools they don't wear masks, but in a community, do they wear masks now? It's obvious, it's a no. It's a no.
I have a follow-up to that. You know, the matric rage that caused the wave last year. So, you know, this big party, everyone goes to like Umhlanga or one of those places and they have a big party. And then the organizers were saying this year they're going to have it again, and they confirm that they will have all the protocols in place, it's going to be safe. But the thing is, when someone is there, a learner is there, and they're enjoying themselves at the venue, that's one thing. But then they leave the venue and they do their own thing. That's when it spreads. It's not actually at the event itself necessarily. So it's the same kind of situation. If you're at school and you're following all the rules, but then you go home and you don't, you're still going to be spreading COVID because you know, you have to have both of them being adhered to at school
I mean,
and at home.
that reminds me of the very first lockdown that we had. I think it was lockdown level 5, when everyone was being told, close up, leave your rooms, leave your apartments, students go back home, leave your residences. And I thought to myself, but essentially what you're doing is just spreading the pandemic itself. Now, Moni, earlier on we were talking about how before the pandemic, we were already having a lot of kids dropping out of school, right? But since the pandemic, we're having a lot more kids dropping out. Are they dropping out because of the pandemic? Do you have an idea of what could be leading to these dropout numbers? And perhaps maybe Sianda, you can add in to that as well.
I think I have an idea. Like, most students are sharing feelings of depression, anxiety, and stress due to the lack of communication with the community in their schools. And some teachers cannot fill up the gap or cannot fill a curriculum of a year with students coming to school with a certain period of time, and we are expected to do all the work, like all the study. It's so much, it's a lot, everything. We feel like all the pressure is in our shoulders. So that's why most students think that it's best if they just give up, because it's a lot.
Can we only point to that point, that it's a lot of workload, or could there be other factors that are leading to these high dropout rates?
I think if we look at it previously, before COVID, learners were dropping out. So let's look at those reasons. And right now, people are under stress, and there's a lot of things that are going on. So the situation right now, it's just fueling what was already happening. So we shouldn't point everything onto COVID. And to add on what she's just said is, like, what I've noticed is learners, they're at school from 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and they only leave school at 5. And there's schools I know of where learners are actually leaving at school, like this is the grade 12s now. They're actually staying at the school. You go to school, there's washing lines and all of those things. So these learners, they are learning. They are not getting time to actually process what they are being taught.
All the information they're receiving.
And then if I'm going to have a session for 2 hours with the geography teacher, and then right after that I'm getting a break, a 15-minute break, that's just for eating. And then it's the maths teacher. I don't get time to actually consolidate what I have been taught throughout the day. And then I have an exam. If I'm not going to perform well in that exam after all the hard work, I am going to give up. Why
so it's like a banking game. Like you take in all that information, you try to store it as much as possible in your head, and then when it's exam time, you just spit it out without actually understanding what is going in there. But very interesting that she mentions, you know, how you have this sort of linear approach to learning, and how all of this information is being banked in your head. Do you find that it could have most probably been a mistake when the department decided that they're going to cut those extramural activities? I don't know, because I would assume that in schools, if you only go and you learn and there's no playtime, you can't kick a ball, you can't do anything. That is bound to stress you out, Vela.
No, it was a decision from national level, this one, of stopping or just to put a pause all these extramural activities.
Yeah.
The reason that the contact in the sport can be the super spreader of the the COVID-19. So in a way, we are still going to go back to a normal situation whereby we find then it started last year, 2020 March, this thing of COVID. So literally we are in a year and some couple of months. So we are still finding ways in which learners can participate actively in these contact sports. So literally it is going to come back, and indeed extramural activity, they are part of the schooling system. So without extracurricular, we are heading for disaster.
All right. Very interesting insights that we are getting today on Beyond the Truth. We're talking schools. Are schools struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, or is it head above water? Now feel free to add your insights and your opinions on all social media platforms, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll have more for you after the break. Should we move towards a borderless Africa?
I would say open up the borders.
To open our borders, it will be committing suicide.
That argument or that idea comes from South African exceptionalism.
You look into our country, we've got Cyprus mafia, Israeli mafia, Nigerian mafia. What nonsense is that?
Well, these are issues that have long existed. Putting South Africa first is not mutually exclusive to looking towards a borderless Africa.
I don't think now is the right time to do this.
Welcome back. You're still watching Beyond the Truth. Now, we can't continue this episode without thanking the National Film and Video Foundation for their generous sponsorship and assisting us to continue with these episodes. Now, we're drawing towards a close, and we're still asking the question, are South African schools struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, or is it head above water? Feel free to move over to our social media platforms to give us your version of the truth. Now we're drawing towards a close, unfortunately. I would have loved for us to speak about so many other different things that are happening in schools. I mean, Mono was making an example about how some educators are not even, living up to their contractual obligation of going to classes. But I'm sure we'll have that discussion one day. Mono, if you could, right? If you could change anything in schools and with learners in particular, and how they are handling the pandemic, what message would you have for learners?
I would totally encourage learners that even if they feel like the work is so much, they should never give up. The pressure may be just too much that they can't even think they would handle it, but they should just bear up. They should just feel that even if this thing is totally hard, they should know that it's their priority. We could try even alternative methods such as blended learning, which ensures that we are academically active with our studies. So I think we should just bear up the pain, we should just stay strong and believe that we can do this. We got this.
A future leader already talking about blended learning. Amanda, if you could change anything in how government, the department, all these different institutions are handling the pandemic, what would you do differently?
I think that, as I said before, everyone is doing their best. I don't think that there's a golden solution to any of this, but I think we all need to come together and work as a collaborative team, and everyone should have their say, and especially the learners. And I think that that's the voice that's been silenced in this whole thing. And that's, I'm so glad that we have a learner here today, because us as adults talking about things that we're not experiencing right now, we're missing out on things. And that's why in EmpowerVate, our program focuses on what learners want to do and fix, and how they're going to fix them, because they are the ones living the experience right now, and they might have solutions that we as adults haven't thought of. So let's bring them to the table and say, what has been your experience, and what do you think we can do better? And then that way we can make things work in a more collaborative way, and we can improve on the situation.
I definitely agree with you on that one. I'm going to come now to Fox, and we'll end off with you, Sianda. Educators are under so much tremendous pressure, and I know this for a fact because of all the teaching and learning that you would have to do and all the experiences that come with COVID-19. How would you advise an educator or a prospective educator who might find themselves as a teacher in the 4th, 5th, 6th, if we're going to have a 100th wave even there, to be able to do their work while handling the pressures that comes with having to deliver quality teaching and ensure that learners receive quality learning as well?
All right, thanks. There are various methods that can be used currently. The online teaching method, it's working with grade 12. and in other schools. So it will depend with that prospective educator. But if you find yourself in a former Model C school, you are fine there. If you find yourself in a rural area, you have to be creative as a teacher. If you find yourself in a township school, you also become creative. So there's no a method wherein you're going to say, if you use this kind of approach to these learners or to this kind of situation, you're going to be fine. I'm optimistic that this thing of COVID is going to move in our life. We're going to have it, but it's going to be lesser now. Many educators are vaccinated. Even the vaccination roll now starts from the age of 18 to upper. So as we get vaccinated, so we can say things are going to be better.
You would swear that you read my mind. I was going to ask you, Siyanda, in terms of schools struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic, learners getting infected, educators getting infected, support staff getting infected, but so much hesitance when it comes to vaccinating. How do we navigate around that space and around that particular challenge to ensure that schools are able to go back to normal, but at the same time, everyone who enters the premises are protected?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So right now, with regards to the vaccination, I'm actually questioning myself. The first thing is, if we're so concerned about the learners, and how many learners do we have going to schools in the entire country? It's millions. Why are we not vaccinating them? Why is the roll only starting at 18? Why are we not prioritizing on our future? Because these are our future leaders. Okay, so that's the first one. And then on the second one is, when you go to the school environment, you notice that the learner, you are going to approach them, only then they put on their mask. The moment you go past, the mask is off. And then it goes back to what you are saying. What is the community? Because what they see in the community is what they are going to do at school. So I think we need to be working together. There needs to be a partnership between the learners, the teachers, the community, and the different stakeholders. Because even the private institutions, there's a lot they could do to schools, to support the schools, by donations, by different interventions that are going to try and mitigate these problems. Because for example if I'm working for a private organization and supporting a certain school, so if a school has 100 learners and they cannot accommodate those 100 learners, if there is a private organization that is willing to employ teachers to try and support the Department of Education for teachers, and we have them in different groups, in different venues, because we also need to look at this thing as, are we looking at education as education, or are we looking at the physical institution, which is the school? Because learning can happen without that physical institution. And that's where it's going to protect everyone from the pandemic.
Very interesting perspectives, from blended learning to involving learners in the decision-making process of COVID-19. That's it from us today here on Beyond the Truth. Remember to follow us on all social media platforms and add your comments to what you think about today's discussion. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.